We'll record in the clued. Okay, folks, welcome to this DevShop marketing briefing. I've got a guest today because, of course, I can't do it all. And my guest is Kai Davis. I've known Kai for 3 years, close to 3 years, I think.
Close to 3 years.
He's taught me pretty much everything I know about how to email people effectively, which falls under the larger umbrella of how to reach out to people you don't know and ask them to do things for you. Listen to a pitch, see if there's a mutual value exchange to be had, pitch them on your services, ask them to talk to you for research purposes. All those things fall under the umbrella of outreach. And in a way, that's a sort of new field. I consider Kai one of the leaders in that field, and am fortunate to be able to just send him an email and get him to agree to do stuff like this. He's going to give you a 30-minute presentation. I'll let him tell you more, but sort of on the topic of how you build better outreach lists. One of the things I've noticed is the quality of the results that you get is partially dependent on how you do the outreach itself, but another part of it is simply just dependent on how good is your list. How closely does it align with the goal that you're trying to reach by doing this outreach? So Kai's got something like a 30-minute presentation. If it goes a few minutes over, Kai, I'm not going to have the cane come in from the side of the stage and yank you off.
Kai's dragged off stage into the water cooler.
That's right. But anyway, I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So we've got Kai for up to 90 minutes. And I've got some questions that folks send in advance. Just a few notes about how this works. Zoom has, in my experience, been just fantastic in terms of reliability and all of that stuff. But it's something not a lot of people have used. So if you float your mouse over the window, I don't know how this works on mobile, to be honest, but if you're on a desktop Zoom client, there's a little Q&A button at the bottom. And what I'd like you to do is, if Kai says anything that you have a question about or you'd like clarification on, or if it just kind of leads to a larger thing that you have some questions about, just drop it in the Q&A. You can drop it in the chat too, and that's fine. I'm going to be keeping an eye on both of those. But Q&A is the best place to put those. When Kai's at the end of his presentation, I'll try to make some sense of the questions and just sort of interview him on your behalf. The other thing I'll do, just as a heads up, is when I get to a question that you've asked in the Q&A, I will promote you to a panelist. Number one, you don't have to do that, but if you want to ask Kai questions real time and have some back and forth with him about what he's saying or ask follow-up questions, you'll be in the live video feed with us to be able to do that. And I just want to make sure you know that, A, you can do that. Oh, great. Greg mentions that mobile also has a button at the bottom for Q&A. So try to use that for your questions. But, at least in any case, just drop them in chat if you can't drop them in the Q&A, and make sure to get to those. I think that's all I really need to say. There will be a recording of this, of course, afterwards. I sort of teased you all about being here live because I think there's real value in the Q&A. But if you have to drop off for some reason, just know there'll be a recording, and it's published in the usual place on my website under the resources section, DevShop Marketing Briefings. I feel like that's all I need to say. Kai, so thankful for you being here. The show's yours. I'm just going to actually at this point turn off my video camera and monitor the chat and questions.
Sounds perfect. Thank you so much for having me, Philip. Thank you so much for everybody who showed up. For everybody who could not show up, I understand that there was a drastic family emergency that prevented you from attending the live webinar. Completely understand. We will not make a black tick mark next to your name, I promise. Philip mentioned that the quality of your outreach campaigns is really dependent on the quality of that list you start with. And we actually already had a question from Matt come in about that quality of the output, depending on the quality of the initial outreach. I'm going to jump into my main presentation in a second, but I just wanted to address that for a second with comparison between two case studies. In one case, the typical response rate for marketing focused outreach. So, hey, I'd love to, be a guest article contributor to your site, or I'd love to be on your podcast, or I'd love like you to write a review of my product, is typically around 8 to 12%. That's the placement rate. You email 100 people, you're going to get 8 folks who say yes. I had a campaign about a year and a half ago where we ended up with, I think, a 60% placement rate. And the client at the end was like, this went so well, we could no longer afford to send out products for people to review because this went so well. Please do more poorly next time. And the reason it was such a successful campaign is because we invested as much time possible at the start of the campaign, building our prospect list, pre-qualifying people, throwing out the people who are not a good fit for a number of reasons, then going through and individually finding the email addresses and the contact information for people, doing another round of qualification at that point. Heading forward and saying, okay, how can we make this as personal as possible while still being automated in terms of outreach? Building our outreach campaign and refining it further at that point. So we ended up with a list of around, I want to say 50 people. And because we had spent so much time and invested so much time in building that initial list, the people were so much more responsive to a more spray and pray approach or shotgun approach of outreach, where we had a list, we're going to email the people and we're going to see what happens. I think the research phase, building that prospect list, is one of the most important parts, if not the most important part of an outreach campaign. In fact, I'd rank it as building your list and follow-up being the most two important aspects. So today, we're going to talk a bit about building that initial prospect list and how to build a high-quality prospect list. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, and Zoom is now giving me the OSX beach ball, which is always promising. Let me share my screen and...
Right, Kai, I see your screen, so we're looking good there.
Excellent. So today...
Actually, hold on, I'm seeing presenter view. You may have
oh my gosh.
swapping.
Let me swap quickly. There's a swap button here. We'll edit this out. It's all live.
No, we won't.
So today we're going to talk about building better, more targeted outreach lists, or as I like to say, how to be an internet stalker for fun and profit. So to start off, I wanted to give some shared definitions. What is outreach? A couple of people submitted this as an early question, and I figured it would be valuable to define it. I view outreach as the process of emailing humans, emailing real people to start a conversation with them about their business, their pains, and their problems. It's reaching out to people and starting that dialogue. So I view outreach as building and managing these relationships through email. And what sort of results should I expect from outreach? Ideally, you're going to see more conversations with people. You're going to have more opportunities to learn from your target market through these conversations. And you're going to have more opportunities to present your services as a solution to the problems you discover through conversations. You do an outreach campaign, you get in touch with some potential clients or some prospects or some people from market research. You discover that they're having this problem in their business and it's a problem you're well equipped to solve. Now you're able to transition that conversation to, well, hey, you're experiencing problem A, B, and C. I'm able to solve those for you through, this resource or this service or this offering I have. Would that be valuable to you? So outreach is that process of starting these conversations with people and learning about their business. And as we talked about earlier, when it comes to outreach, a better, more qualified prospect list, it's going to make you more money. Because if we just start our outreach campaigns from a point of saying, hey, we've got 50 leads we're going to email or 50 prospects we're going to email, but we haven't done any qualifying process on them, we're going to have a very low response rate. We're going to have a very low engagement rate. It's because our list is vague, it's widespread, it's not as targeted as it could be. And by focusing in on just the best buyers, by going through this pre-qualification process, by investing the time and research necessary to take our list and refine it down to the specific people we're trying to reach, the people who match our profile, match our definition of our best buyer, who fit into our target market, who we understand, who we could see have the triggers or have the problems that we're equipped to solve or fit into the target market that we're targeting, we're going to have a better time. We're going to have more success. There's this wonderful quote from Chet Holmes from the book Ultimate Sales Machine. There are always fewer best buyers than there are all buyers. And I think that's extremely important when we think about building a prospect list for outreach. I could tell you, I've got 10,000 people queued up to email. Well, how valuable is it going to be to email those 10,000 people versus investing the time to winnow down that list to 100 people who are really targeted and who are exactly who we want to reach by focusing our research to help us identify the best buyers and then target them explicitly in a campaign, we're going to have a much more successful campaign than one targeting all potential buyers. We could think of the difference of, hey, I'm going to email every single person who owns a home in Sebastopol, or I'm going to email every person who owns a home in Sebastopol and bought it in the last 3 years and see, hey, do you need any improvements done on your house? The second one is going to be much more targeted. It's going to connect better with the problem they're experiencing and the outcome they're looking for. So by refining our outreach list, by refining our prospect list down to one that targets just the best buyers, for whatever definition we want to use the best buyer, we're going to have a more successful campaign. I think it comes down to this point: tiny targeted outreach lists can dramatically outperform huge lists. So let's talk a little bit about different strategies for building your outreach list. And I really see it being as 3 critical factors. The first is understanding the vertical and the target market that you're targeting. You have to be able to answer that question. And through your work with Followup, you are able to answer that question. You understand your positioning, the niche you're targeting, the target market you're going after. The second question is, well, what type of databases are available? Where could I find this information? And I think of a database as being just any collection of leads or prospects. This could be LinkedIn. This could be an actual database of a company. This could be a top 500 companies in the sector list. This could be your local business directory. But understanding the type of databases that are available for you to use to generate lists of prospects, and then the type of qualifying criteria you want to search by. So when I think about it, I broke it down in my head as a spreadsheet, and it starts from the center where we have a knowledge of your vertical and target market. From there, we move over to the right, understanding the database provider or lead source we want to go to find our prospects. And then we go to identifying companies, the people who are good matches for our positioning. There's also that secondary track, identify triggers. And this could be criteria we've identified that means somebody is a good fit to work with us. And it could be they use a specific piece of technology. I want to work with people who are using Amazon Web Services. Okay, great. We'll want to identify that as a trigger and use that to refine our prospect list. It could be a market need. It could be a change that they've experienced, or it could have been, it's just an annual time or a periodic time that they have this trigger. They have this need to work with us. By understanding these types of triggers, we're able to use them as a refining criteria on our list and be able to say, okay, yeah, I have 100 companies on this list, but I'm targeting companies that use Amazon Web Services. Only 50 of these companies use Amazon Web Services. I want to throw the other 50 out because they don't pass that trigger test. So, like I said previously, your vertical and your target market come from your positioning statement. Databases and lead providers are sources you could prospect from. So when it comes to what exactly qualifies as a database or lead provider, I'm going to throw a whole list of them at you. I was blown away when I started writing down everyone I could think of and doing a little research into it. But I just want to sort of info dump like everything I found that qualifies as a database or a lead provider to help inspire you as you ask that question of where am I supposed to find these people to outreach to? Like I tried the LinkedIn and the LinkedIn didn't work. I tried the Google and the Google didn't work. What exactly is left? So let's go into the big old list. Top 500 or top 50, 100, or 500 lists for your industry can be an incredibly valuable source. When I worked in the construction industry, we would identify people we wanted to reach out to for strategic partnerships by looking at the top 100 lists of construction companies in Oregon and saying, great, these are people we want to reach out to because if they get a job that doesn't fit with their company, it will fit with our company potentially. So identifying these top 50, 100, or 500 lists for your industry or target market could be an incredibly valuable way to say like, okay, great, here's 500 companies to qualify. LinkedIn prospecting, especially with the Sales Navigator upgrade, is a wonderful way to identify people who match your target market and identify those decision makers within the company. Business directories like the Chamber of Commerce or Crunchbase, an excellent source of excellent database source for leads. Buying lists, just purchasing them from people who sell lists, can also be an effective way to identify these companies. You'll definitely want to go through more of a sanitization protocol if you buy a list to make sure you're emailing the right people or the highest value people on the list, but it's another way to get a list of people to contact for market research or outreach purposes at large. Commercial database providers like Winmo, Jigsaw, which is now, I believe, Leads by Salesforce, or Contacts by Salesforce is another provider. Net Prospects by Dun & Bradstreet is another commercial database provider. These are more on the expensive, pricey side, but they provide well-targeted lists where you could search by any number of criteria and get an exact specific list of prospects to target through outreach. Companies using a specific technology is another way you could build this lead list. I like the tools Built With and Nerdy Data that allow you to search based on a specific technology a site is using or a HTML snippet that the site might be using. I recently worked on an outreach campaign for a client where we said, hey, we want to target people who are using Infusionsoft. So we signed up for a Nerdy Data account. We identified a little form embed tag that every single Infusionsoft form uses, and we searched with Nerdy Data. And we got back a list of 600 sites that were using Infusionsoft. Boom, that was our initial prospecting list. Those are our initial leads that we were going to contact. Facebook ads targeting your industry combined with a lead magnet or an ethical bribe, sign up for this, get my free white paper on that, can be another wonderful way to build a lead and prospecting list to reach out to. Awards lists can be invaluable. If you find an awards list for people in your industry or people in your target market, that provides a wonderful database of people to reach out to. Trade show lists like sponsor lists or attendee lists, again, a wonderful source of information and leads that you could reach out to. Competitor client lists can be an invaluable source of prospecting information or to build an outreach list. If your competitor has a portfolio on their website and says like, hey, we worked with these 50 wonderful companies, well, those are 50 people you're now able to reach out to, either to do market research or to start that conversation saying, hey, I see that you purchased this type of service in the past. Do you still have a problem with that? Do you have this similar problem that we could help you solve? Referral lists from clients, prospects, lost leads, or friends can be invaluable. Just reaching out to past clients or prospects and saying, hey, we work together or we almost work together. I'm wondering, do you know somebody who's experiencing a similar problem? Lost leads, prospects that you weren't able to work with can end up being another great source of referrals. Friends and colleagues saying, hey, do you know anybody who matches this positioning statement? If so, I'd love an introduction. Can be a wonderful way to build up this database of lead providers for you and your business. Lists from non-competitors in your market could also be incredibly valuable because let's say we're working in a specific industry and other people are targeting that industry, but with different services, but they're still serving that same target market. There's an opportunity to say, hey, I've got a list of 100 prospects and past clients. You've got a list of 100 prospects and past clients. We're not in direct competition with each other, even though we're serving the same market. Can we swap our lists, swap our database and see what value that provides to each other or if that helps us contact new prospects? So reaching out to non-competitors in your market can be another wonderful source of leads or another database that you could take advantage of. Finally, non-ask events, or what I think of as point of entry events. These could be no-pitch webinars, a podcast, a guest article, a local event you host, a meetup, can be a wonderful way to build a prospecting list or a list of potential leads. So there are dozens of different ways. This is just a small sampling of all the different ways that are out there to go through that database process and identify companies that are a match for prospecting and for outreach. So I'm sharing this with you just to share that there are so many different ways that we could attack this problem of how do I reach people in my target market? How do I build this outreach list? How do I find a database of information? You could use this list and I think be set for the next 2 years, just going down strategy by strategy, or you could be inspired by this and say, well, hey, you mentioned this option, but there's another option that's made me think of that could be equally as valuable. So there's a number of different ways to find different leads in these different online databases. So you want to use your database or of lead providers to build your initial list of companies. Then you want to pre-qualify the companies by comparing them to your qualification criteria. So let's talk a little bit about pre-qualification. I think about it as throwing the fish back into water. I'm going to quickly close my door because I'm going blind. So with pre-qualification, we really want to focus on understanding who our ideal prospect is and seeing, well, okay, I identified this company. Maybe we reached out to a non-competitor in our market space and they gave us a list of 100 prospects. We're going to go through that list and say, well, who is a fit and who is not a fit? And I think we best approach it by answering a series of questions. What trigger means that someone is qualified? What has happened in their business that could expose a problem that we could solve for them? It might be they just got a new website, or it might be their website is really old, or it might be something else depending on your business and the services you provide. But understanding the trigger that precedes the problem they're experiencing will be invaluable in understanding whether somebody is qualified or not. Additionally, understanding the types of qualifying criteria you want to use to screen your list. It might be company age, it might be company size, it might be revenue, it might be number of employees. Understanding the criteria that match up with your ideal customers is a wonderful pre-qualification step to take, because you could go through a list of companies you've identified and say, well, you know, a third of these don't meet my qualifying criteria. Excellent. Set those companies aside. Don't bother reaching out to them. If they aren't a good match at this stage, it's not worth investing time to identify decision makers and identify email addresses for those decision makers. So then you want to screen the companies you've identified and see if they qualify based on qualifying criteria and triggers. And it might be, are they using a specific technology? And the example might be, hey, I'm searching for companies that are using Drip for their marketing automation. Well, if we get a list of 100 companies that are using marketing automation tools that we thought were using Drip, and we see, oh, half of them aren't actually using Drip, well, we're going to throw those companies out. They don't match that trigger or that qualifying criteria of using Drip for their marketing automation. It might be, are they demonstrating a specific market need? So they might have a non-mobile website, or they might be using an old version of Rails on their site, and we're positioning ourselves as helping them solve this problem. So we identify that market need, and if we see like, oh, their website is actually perfectly mobile compatible already, oh, I guess they won't need our services, or they aren't an ideal candidate at this point for our services, we've disqualified them, set them aside. Another qualifying criteria I like to look at is, has a change recently happened in their business or industry? And if so, how does it affect them? Is there new legislation? Is there a reporting requirement? Is there something else that might be causing them pain or angst inside of their business? If so, how could we identify if the business is suffering from that? It could become another qualifying criteria we look to. And finally, I think time plays in as a qualifying criteria. It might be for our businesses, there's a periodic time that our customers experience a need for the service we're providing. It might be, say, tax season. Every tax season, they go through this process. So tax season is when we want to provide a service to them. So understanding whether it's technology or a market need or a change in the market or industry or business or a periodic time can help us better understand whether a company is qualified as a prospect for us and worth reaching out to, or is better to set aside and eliminate from our prospecting list, the list we initially gather from one of the database sources. So we're able to focus on just contacting the companies that are qualified, that do match our criteria. If we're, say, only working with people who use Drip for marketing automation, well, then we'll want to say, okay, we've set aside the people who are using Infusionsoft and MailChimp. They're not our ideal people to contact at this point, and we're left with a refined, pre-qualified list of people who do match our qualifying criteria. And again, eliminate companies that are not qualified to build your pre-qualified list. So when we jump back to our graph, we could see we start with the knowledge of our vertical or a target market. We go to a database provider or a lead source, a non-competitor in the market, the top 50 companies in the industry, something else. We identify companies on that list that seem like they're a good fit. Okay, it's a list of the top 50 dental offices in Oregon. That's my target market. I help dental offices get more repeat customers. I'm going to go contact those people. Well, now we've pre-qualified them against triggers. Oh, I'm helping them get more customers, but they already have marketing automation in place. Doesn't look like they're a good fit. Once we winnow down that list of companies we identified against our list of triggers or qualifying criteria, we're left with a list of pre-qualified companies. These are the companies we want to invest time, effort, and energy into identifying the decision makers at, the people we want to reach out to, and finding a means to contact them. Outreach through email is my preferred methodology. Other people may prefer outreach through phone or outreach through another source. We'll touch on that in the Q&A, but for this lecture, I'm focusing on ways to identify their email address to begin that outreach process, primarily because email outreach is a less intimidating thing to get started with and a less intimidating thing for the recipient. It's easier to receive an email than receive a phone call from a stranger. So there's several approaches for finding critical information about the companies you're trying to reach out to once you've qualified them. Now that we have a list of pre-qualified companies, we want to identify that key outreach info. And let's take a look at what that is. So in my mind, the key outreach information we need is, what's the company? Well, we've already got that one. So we've identified the company on our database list or our lead list, and we know, oh, this is the company we're targeting. So congratulations, we've already accomplished that one. Next one is, who are the key decision makers we could initiate outreach to? Who are the people that match the profile of the person we want to reach? How could we identify them? And then once we've identified the decision makers, well, how could we find their email addresses? What steps do we take there? So let's talk a little bit about identifying decision makers. And there's a few different steps that I recommend to take to identify the people you want to reach out to. The first is searching on their website. And I've had a lot of success with this. Once I have that list of companies, I'm able to identify their website. And then I'll want to search on their website and see, do they have a company directory online? Are they listing like, oh, our CMO and CTO are these two people? If those are the people I'm trying to contact, excellent. I've now found who I'm trying to reach. See, the decision maker I'm trying to initiate contact with is at that company. So searching their website and seeing if there's a company directory there is labor intensive, but it's a very valuable way of seeing like, oh, this is the person who's now in charge of this division. That's the person I want to reach out to. And if I can't make contact with them, these are additional people to reach out to. You could use LinkedIn to identify these people. And I highly, highly, highly recommend LinkedIn's Sales Navigator upgrade. I think it's a very worthwhile investment that lets you specifically target a company, see everybody on LinkedIn associated with that company, and see all information about their position and work history at that company. So LinkedIn plus the Sales Navigator is a very effective way to identify these decision makers once you have a list of those companies. It's very easy to go from, I have the company name, to, okay, great, I'm using LinkedIn and Sales Navigator to see specifically who the people who work at that company are. From there, I also recommend using the People Also Viewed feature on LinkedIn. And this is buried in the right column on LinkedIn, but it could often point you to similar decision makers in the same company or in a different company to target. You might be targeting, again, dental offices in Oregon, and you see, oh, okay, I see the owner of this, but I also see there's 5 other dental office owners listed as People Also Viewed. Oh, great, here are 5 additional prospects and 5 additional companies for me to reach out to. Finally, Clearbit Prospector is a wonderful, wonderful resource if you're programming friendly. They have an API that allows you to search across a number of different demographic information to find specific people. So if, let's say, you want to reach out to engineers who work at Twitter, using Clearbit Prospector's API, you'll be able to initiate a call that says, okay, great, hey, give me a list of all the engineers who work at Twitter, or who match this qualifying criteria. So Clearbit Prospector is another wonderful way to feed in a company and get back a list of people who match the specific criteria you're looking for, be it title, be it company size, or be it something else. Once you've identified that decision maker, once you've gone through that process of saying, well, this is the company I'm targeting, this is the person I'm trying to reach, then we're left that question of, how do I find somebody's email address? And I think there's a number of different tools that are really valuable here. The first is hunter.io. And with hunter.io, you're able to upload a list of companies, their web addresses, get emails that Hunter has identified as being associated with that company online by spidering and crawling across the web. And then you can qualify those emails against decision makers. Okay, great, I have this list of emails here. Which one matches up with a decision maker that I've identified at this company? Or am I able to use Hunter to identify a decision maker at this company? Hunter also has a LinkedIn integration that I absolutely love. As you browse LinkedIn, there's now a little, next to that send in-mail button or send message button, there's now a find email address button. And you can one click and it takes about 5 seconds and it searches and says, hey, I found Kai's email address. Here it is for you. And we're 80% certain that this is Kai's email address. And we found 15 sources that list this as being Kai's email address. So hunter.io is a wonderful addition to your arsenal for finding someone's email address, especially if you're using LinkedIn and Sales Navigator as part of your prospecting process. It flawlessly fits into that process. There's a process I call the magic Twitter search. We'll get into a few seconds, but that's another wonderful way to identify the email address, or another way to attempt to identify the email address for a prospect you've identified. It's a little more labor intensive, but it could often return a result when others can't. There's what I call the magic email search, which we'll demo in a few seconds. That is another way to search and find a prospect's email address based on their name and the company that they work at. Finally, there's the process of manually searching their website. It's the most labor-intensive of all, but often it can give you a great indication of who makes sense as a prospect and what their email address is. Oftentimes, we're able to find that email address listed on their website. So hunter.io, as I mentioned, it allows you to just contact anyone and unlock opportunities. You drop in the company name like philipmorganconsulting.com or kaidavis.com and click find email addresses, and Hunter says, hey, here's a list of all the email addresses we found associated with that domain. It's a wonderful way to get a list of potential prospects to reach out to, especially when you correlate it with the decision maker you identified previously. As I mentioned, their LinkedIn navigation is A+ awesome. I highly recommend it. With a magic Twitter search, we're focusing on identifying the email address for somebody by searching through their tweets. Oftentimes people will tweet out their email address, even if it's more of a private email address, just in response to somebody else. Hey, email me at kai@kaidavis.com. And we see what happens when we search through Twitter. So the process starts with using the tool All My Tweets. And from there, you want to find the Twitter handle for your prospect. Searching on Google for something like first name, last name, and Twitter typically surfaces a few leads for what that Twitter handle is. From there, you'll want to log into All My Tweets and just search their Twitter handle, and it will return a list of all their tweets. Once All My Tweets loads, you'll want to just search for the word email or the domain name with the @ symbol, or the domain name with @ and the dot replaced with @ and dot spelled out. This is a very effective way to see if they've shared their email address in their Twitter feed before. So you just scan through the results that include the word or phrase you searched for and see if any match up with their email address. If they do, wonderful. Capture that email address and save it with that prospect in whatever you're using as an outreach tool or whatever you're using to build your outreach list in, like a spreadsheet, because now you found one potential email address to contact them at. The magic email search is another method that I really enjoy. With the magic email search, you'll really need two things to start off. The person's first and last name, in this example, Kai Davis, and the site URL for the person you're trying to reach. In this example, my consulting website, wyouraudience.com. So once you have their first and last name along with their site URL, you'll want to plug both of those pieces of data into the specific Google search. First name, last name, email, and then in text at site URL, whatever the site URL is. And like I say, we replace the first name and last name with their first and last name, in this case, Kai Davis, and we replace site URL with their site URL, in this case, wyouraudience.com, and we input this search into Google. What it does is return a list of all instances where it found, hey, my name, Kai and Davis, correlated with the word email and with at wyouraudience.com listed there. And we could see here, it pulled up, oh, Kai at wyouraudience is one option. Hello at wyouraudience is another option. Office at wyouraudience is a third option. So if you've identified a prospect you want to reach out to and you're saying, okay, I know their first name and last name, I can't find it anywhere else, and I know their domain name, but I can't really guess what their email address is, you're able to use the magic email search to search in Google to see if you're able to pick up a few leads for what their email address might be. This is a wonderful backup tool to use if Hunter doesn't quite make it there or the other methods don't quite make it there in terms of finding that prospect's email address. Finally, you could search their website. It's, like I said, much more time intensive, but oftentimes in an old article or a blog post or on a contact page or the about page, you're able to find an email address for somebody that you're trying to reach, and from there, start that outreach process. I list it as the last option because it's usually my final fallback option, but it still is a valuable source for finding a prospect's information. So once we've built up this list, we've identified the companies, we've identified decision makers, we found their email addresses, we'll want to go through another qualifying process to qualify the list and clean the list for maximum quality. For that, I recommend a few different tools. One is Clearbit enrichment. So we might be in the position where we have an email address and a company and a name, but we want some additional demographic information about them. Clearbit enrichment is software that adds in details like name, company, location, based on their email address. You upload a spreadsheet, and a few minutes later, it gives you back a spreadsheet with all of this information filled in. It enriches the data for you. So I typically start out by saying, okay, I've got a list here, and it's okay. It has some of the information I'm looking for. Maybe I have a first name, but not a last name. Maybe I have the email address, but I haven't been able to find the first and last name. I'll use Clearbit enrichment to fill in any missing data and see what Clearbit gives me back. From there, I'll run the email addresses I have through list cleaning software. And I run my lists through this list cleaning software in order to screen out emails that will bounce. And the tools that I recommend and like are neverbounce.com and datavalidation.com. There's a number of different free and paid list cleaning softwares out there. These are the two that I started using and have enjoyed using. There might be others that you've used in the past or been recommended to you. I honestly see list cleaning software as being very much a commoditized service. If you find one you like, stick with it. If you're looking for a recommendation, I recommend neverbounce and datavalidation.com. And finally, I recommend a second pass of visual qualification. So we might end up with a list of 10, 20, 50, or 100 different companies and websites. Go through them. It might take an hour or 2 hours, but it's well worth the time to go through and just do that final check of, hey, is this a company that's worth reaching out to? Do they match my positioning? Do they have the trigger that indicates they have a problem I could solve? Oftentimes, when I do the second pass visual qualification, I'll notice 5 or 10 additional companies that shouldn't quite be in the list because they aren't the best fits. I'll eliminate them from the list or set them aside for a second round of outreach, but it's only through the second pass visual qualification that I'm able to identify the companies that I want to eliminate from my list before I start that outreach process. And to do that, you want to just scan through your list of qualified companies with decision makers and email addresses and eliminate companies that don't seem like a good fit. So when we go back to our big old graph here, we've started out with knowledge of our vertical or target market. We've moved on to a database provider or lead source, the large list we shared earlier, different ways to identify companies. We've identified companies through a database provider that match our positioning that we want to build into our prospecting and outreach list. We've pre-qualified those companies against triggers we've identified, things that indicate they're in need of our services. Now we have a list of pre-qualified companies. From there, we move forward into identifying the decision makers, the people we want to contact at these companies. We find their email addresses. Then we run through that second round of cleaning our list, eliminating people who aren't the best fit after we've done this round of finding decision makers and email addresses. And now we're left with this targeted outreach list, a list of people that we're specifically able to contact to build relationships and engage in conversations, learn more about their business and the problems they're experiencing and how we might be able to help. And then we're able to start that formal outreach process. A few people wrote in before the presentation today and said, hey, I'm really curious about LinkedIn outreach. What are tips you have for doing LinkedIn outreach? How can we do it well? And I personally think very poorly of LinkedIn outreach for a couple different reasons. I'm going to talk about how to do it well, but well, the reasons I don't like LinkedIn outreach is you can't easily or automatically follow up with prospects. It's very often I found to be a send the email or send the LinkedIn message, wait a bit, remember to follow up again manually. And if you're doing that at scale, 50 companies, 100 decision makers, it's very quickly going to turn into a bad time where you're trying to remember who you followed up with and what email to send. And it's not easy to automate. So I like things that are easy to automate. I think people are trained to react negatively to the very mention of LinkedIn. I see people tweet about LinkedIn on Twitter and everybody responds with, how do I unsubscribe from everything they have? I hate LinkedIn, it's terrible. And yeah, it kind of is terrible. I dislike it too, but it's great for building prospect lists. But I think people are trained to react negatively to getting messages or engaging in conversations on LinkedIn or LinkedIn as a whole. So I tend to shy away from LinkedIn outreach because of that reason. Additionally, LinkedIn messages are a separate inbox from your main inbox, so it's incredibly easy to ignore. I log into LinkedIn maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, and I'll be like, oh, I have 6 messages here. I should read them. And they often aren't that high value, but they've been sitting there for so long because I'm not in the habit of checking my LinkedIn inbox. And I've set Gmail to automatically set anything LinkedIn sends me to spam because I react very negatively to the very mention of LinkedIn. So doing outreach through LinkedIn itself can be difficult because your outreach message may sit there for a week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks until the prospect remembers to log in, sees that there's a message waiting there, and then reads the message. So it can be difficult to get the sort of cadence or the response cycle you're searching for. But it is an outreach strategy. And it's an outreach strategy that I've had clients and coaching students use very successfully. So I want to walk through what I see LinkedIn outreach looking like when it's done right. So in terms of LinkedIn outreach done right, we want to start with a clear vertical or target market. We want to understand exactly who we're trying to reach and how to find them. We want to identify the decision makers we're looking for on LinkedIn using LinkedIn or LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And we're going to sort them into 3 different categories. The best quality are people we've already met, people we know through industry events, meetups, conferences, any sort of connection we have. Next, we have okay quality, people you're acquaintance with or first, second, third degree connections with. You can make an argument about why you're messaging them or why you're sending them an invitation. It's like, hey, we met at the thing, or you're friends with Philip and I'm friends with Philip. But those are sort of the okay quality people. Finally, there's poor quality. And I think of these as strangers, people you don't know. It's really, really hard to initiate a conversation over LinkedIn with a stranger because people are trained to respond to those unsolicited messages as, oh, this is just spam. Why would I engage with you over this? So first, sort it into these 3 qualities. Target your best quality prospects first, then okay quality, and then throw out the poor quality, the people you don't know yet. I don't think cold outreach on LinkedIn works extremely well. I think it's going to be a very uphill battle for people attempting it. So to build a relationship with the best quality people, if you already know them, send an invitation to connect. Reference how you know each other. Great seeing you at MicroConf, or wonderful seeing you at this conference, and make an offer of value. Hey, when I saw you, you mentioned that your website isn't getting enough traffic. Is that still a problem? Asking this question gives them an opportunity to respond and either qualify themselves in, yes, it is a problem, or qualify themselves out. Now we hired a consultant and it's fixed already. From there, as they respond back, your goal is to follow up and transition that conversation either to email or the phone. You want to get off LinkedIn as quickly as you can so you're in their inbox where they're able to see your emails and respond to you. When it comes to okay people, people who are first, second degree acquaintances that you aren't connected with yet or you have a tangential relationship with, what I recommend is a process like this. First, visit their profile. Wait for them to visit you back. And once they do, then send them an invitation to connect. Say, oh, hey, I just saw you were checking out my profile and wanted to connect with you. Reference how you know each other if there is something to reference. Great seeing you at this conference. If not, reference something exciting about their company or industry. Hey, I see you're working with this new technology. Or hey, congratulations on the promotion. Show that there's a reason behind you reaching out and connecting with them. If they respond, or after a few days after that initial message, make an offer of value. Say, hey, is your website, having trouble with this, or is your business struggling with that? I'd love to learn more about it and better understand the problem, using it as an opportunity for market research or to engage in a human-to-human conversation with them. The response rate or success rate will be lower than with the best people, because these are people who you might be acquaintances with, not people you're closely tied to. So it'll be okay. For building the relationship with strangers, difficulty mode is going to be super hard on this. They'll have no clue who you are, and it's going to be very hard to build that relationship. What I really recommend is, if it's somebody you don't have that connection with, don't do the initial outreach. Don't build that conversation over LinkedIn. Instead, find their email address and reach out to them over email, where you could easily follow up or add them to a follow-up sequence. Don't try to initiate that conversation over LinkedIn. So I break it down like this in my mind. When's the last time you thought, ooh, someone sent me a message on LinkedIn, I wonder what it says, or I haven't checked my LinkedIn inbox today, I better do that right now? For me, I can literally say never in my life have I ever had either of those thoughts. So by doing cold outreach through LinkedIn, it's going to be a while before somebody sees your message. It's going to be a while before they respond to the message. If they see it, they might not ever respond. It's much easier to identify their email address and start that conversation over email. You could automatically follow up with them rather than remembering to log into LinkedIn and send them another message. So building the relationship for cold outreach through LinkedIn with strangers is very difficult and not a strategy I recommend. What I do recommend is, with LinkedIn, build trust by first acting human and then focusing on providing value, understanding the problems they're experiencing as business owners, presenting solutions, providing information to them, make them say, oh, wow, this person is really helpful. This person is helping me solve these problems, and then transition the conversation forward to discovering more about the problems they're experiencing and how your service offerings or what you're providing makes sense as a solution. And I'd love to open it up to the group now for questions and probably, most likely, I hope so, answers.
All right. So Kai, you went over a few minutes. For every minute you went over, you'll have to stay 2 minutes extra.
Yes. I have no clue how to end the stop screen share. There's a button here. There, I think I clicked it.
Yeah, there we go.
Excellent.
That was fantastic. Okay, let's do this. I want to do a sort of lightning round of real quick questions that I have. And while that's happening, I want folks in the audience to think of questions they have, drop them in the Q&A. We've already got 3 great questions in there queued up, but we'll just start with, again, a sort of lightning round of real quick questions. Give us some kind of benchmark for how we know if we're doing this right. What's a great response rate? What's kind of okay? What's bad? I know it's going to vary a lot based on the quality of the list you build, but what have you seen?
It's very much a how long is a piece of string question. The best answer I could give is split into multiple batches. For your first batch, it's going to set the benchmark, and then the second batch, third batch you send, you'll be able to say, okay, I got a response rate of X or an open rate of Y. I'm going to try to improve on that now. I've seen it vary for cold outreach campaigns, especially when it's like sales or market research focused. It might be a 3 to 5% response rate. It might be a 10 to 15% response rate. There could be a wide swing in there depending on how likely they are to respond, how eager they are to respond, how much your messaging resonates with what they're looking for. But again, there's no hard and fast rule, I think, about what is successful. Higher numbers obviously are successful. Like, you want a higher open rate and a higher response rate. But in terms of benchmarks, it could differ so much from industry to industry, campaign to campaign. I've even had campaigns targeting the same industry, but with different messaging. One dramatically outperformed the other because as I better understood the messaging people would respond to, I was able to incorporate that in and then iteratively see my open rate and response rate increase. So I say start with a test batch, see what your benchmarks are, and then if you have a low open rate, focus on your subject lines. If you have a low engagement rate or response rate, focus on your body copy and calls to action in the emails.
What's the best response rate you've ever seen?
Best response rate I've ever seen was for a targeted outreach campaign to fashion bloggers. And we had this was that absurdly high placement rate I referenced earlier. I saw, oh gosh, I think it was 80% response or 80% open rate, 60% response rate. And I think we converted 100% of the people who responded into actual placement. So very well researched list. We had a year of experience working with this target market. And so it was very easy for us to really have that messaging dialed in.
That's great. Okay. What are, off the top of your head, 2 or 3 things that will absolutely kill your response rate? What should you just never do?
Terrible calls to action If you don't have a call to action, people will not know what to do and they will delete your email. Talking exclusively about yourself instead of talking about them will kill your response rate. I've been on the receiving end of so many emails where people are like, hello, me, me, you. And you never get to the you part because they're just talking about themselves through that entire email. So make sure your emails are you focused. Third thing that will absolutely kill your response rate, I would say, is not indicating what will happen after somebody replies. So I'm very much a fan of having my calls to action be like, reply, and then XYZ will happen. Reply, and I'll send you over a few questions. Reply, and then we'll discuss how to schedule a meeting. If people don't know what's going to happen next, they're going to be like, I don't know what's behind that door. I'm scared of opening that door. I'm going to delete this email. So make sure your calls to action specify what they should do and what they should expect to happen next.
Yeah, that's the same reason I never have the text click here in a marketing email. I always have the full link for that exact same reason.
Yep.
General comments on the quality of different data sources. I'm sure you didn't point us to anything bad, but are there data sources you see people using that maybe you would avoid or vice versa?
Buying lists is generally, I think, the highest risk one. It can be a valuable way to get a list of people. I think if you buy a list, you really want to invest a lot of time in qualifying those people. You might buy 1,000 email addresses and end up with 100 you're able to reach out to because 900 of them, 90% you disqualified, but there's still value in that 100 you're left with. Other bad data sources I see people use more often come down to they did not invest the time in qualifying the leads after they generated them. They didn't do a pre-qualification or a post-qualification process, or they didn't do, this really isn't the lead side, but I think it relates to it. They didn't do any research to understand the messaging that target market would respond to. And because it's undifferentiated messaging, it doesn't relate to the target market. People are just not going to respond. So it's not really a quality of data source there, but it's you didn't invest the time in researching these people after you got the lead list. Now you're going to have a bad time.
Okay. Ballpark figure here. When you're qualifying, how much of your list is going to probably go away? We're talking half, a quarter. What do you tend to see?
I typically see somewhere between 15 and 50% drop off. Okay. I'll start off by bucketing a larger number of people. I'll have sort of a wide and vague criteria to get them on the list initially, and then I'll do a lot of refinement. So I don't view it as failure if I kick 50% of the people off the list. I view it as success. Okay, great. I've winnowed my list down to, a very specific and targeted number now.
You were just probably going to waste your time with the people you weren't willing to kick off, right?
Exactly.
Do you have any advice on finding the right job role? I see a lot of my mentoring students run into this. They're investigating a target market, a niche of some kind, and they're not quite sure who the right person to talk to is. What's your advice for that? Do you start high and then try to go low, or vice versa? How do you approach that?
Great question. I very much like the strategy of starting high, emailing either the CEO or a CXO, chief something officer at the company. I should refer to as CWO, chief whatever officer. And asking and seeing if they get a response and get a referral down. Probably 60% of my outreach campaigns start with this very, very simple email. Hi, name. Are you the right person to speak to about expensive problem? If not, who do you recommend I speak with? Thanks. Hi. I might add some additional social proof there, but the benefit of that email is it's asking them a question. Are you the right person? Yes or no? If they respond yes, wonderful. They responded and now we're able to engage. If they respond no, most of the time they say, you want to talk to, Jane or Joe who handles this. This is their email. Or you respond back and say, wonderful. What's their email address so I could connect with them? And now you're able to enter into that conversation saying, hey, I just talked to the CEO and they recommended I speak to you about this. So we might not know the job title to search for, but by searching for the most likely job title and starting off with that conversation of, are you the right person to speak to about this? We'll get either repeatedly directed to the right role, and that will inform our overall iterative research process. Now we could go back and search specifically for that role or variations on that title. Okay.
How big of an org would you use that talk to the CEO first approach with?
I literally use it with one-person companies up through multi-100-person companies. My logic on it is, if it's a one-person company, they're going to be flattered and say, thank you so much. Yes, I am the right person to talk to. And we started off on a great foot. If it's a larger company, it will benefit ourselves to use that outreach method or that outreach email because we'll be referred to the right department or the right person. So I see it as being universally applicable. There's no company too small, and there's definitely not a company too large.
Okay. So, you would do that with the CEO of Target, or?
I would try it with the CEO of Target.
Yeah.
if I was trying to do an outreach campaign to target, I definitely try that to the CEO. I wouldn't expect a response back, but I'd probably identify 10 to 15 different people at target, and in parallel or in sequence, use that similar outreach. Hey, Jane, you're the CMO. Are you the right person? Hey, you're the CTO. Are you the right person? Until I get a hit and a referral. And then I start the real conversation with the person I'm referred to.
Okay. In terms of keeping up to date on industry news, any generally applicable advice about news sources to follow, or is it just kind of depend on the industry more than anything?
Depends on the industry more than anything, but that's actually a very valuable question to ask people through, honestly, LinkedIn outreach or through an initial outreach conversation. You might be starting off with a new target market and you're saying, I'm not sure what questions to ask yet, but I want to start this outreach process. Just saying like, hey, I'm trying to bone up on news about insert industry here. What are two, podcasts or magazines or content-focused websites you read so I can learn more about this industry? It's easy for people to respond and be like Daring Fireball on this podcast, and great, now you know what industry news sources to follow. So that could be a very valuable question to ask people in your target market or ask people through outreach.
Nice. Let's go back to that almost one-line email. Are you the right person to talk to about thing? I found that wording the last part of that sentence is often tricky, especially for people who are doing more market research. They don't have a lot of experience with the market they're looking into, right? Mm-hmm. So they don't know exactly what to say. And if you're too vague, the problem is people are like, they just kind of ignore it, right? If it's too vague. So, what's your experience taught you about that?
It's very much a catch-22 situation where early on, like we're pointing out, you don't have the specific market information to know, oh, this is the problem I'm going to reference. And the email does suffer. But there's not really an easy way to understand what the expensive problem is to include in that email until we've gone through a couple market research conversations. So the two-step strategy I recommend is focusing that instead of on a specific problem to talk about about the industry as a whole, or if you have a general, vague, nebulous idea of the problem, include that. It might be fuzzy and not crispy, but it's better than nothing. And over time, you might have a low response rate initially because people are like, they want to talk about technology? No. But a few people will say yes. And from those few conversations, you will learn more about the language they use to describe that problem. Now you're able to go back to those initial emails, revise that language you use, and reach out maybe a second time and say, hey, are you the right person to talk about getting more traffic for your website or increasing your e-commerce conversion rate? So we really want to have an iterative approach where we're feeding back in language we discover through our conversations into our outreach sequence, and even going back to people we reached out to initially who didn't respond and following up with them again with a more specific ask.
Is there a way to make that feel less salesy? Does it feel salesy when people are approached with, let's take the example of, are you the right person to talk to about increasing your website conversion rate? Mm-hmm. I'm like, this sure sounds like step one of some kind of a sales conversation. Is there a way to kind of take that fear out of it?
I think it's a valid fear. I think one way, so let me approach a couple different ways we can take the fear out of it. One would be recognizing there's always going to be some people who say no, or some people who view any amount of outreach you do as being salesy and just nope out of it. We have to accept that as being the case. I've gotten nasty grams back from people who are like, how dare you email me about this thing? And at first I was like, I'm going to go curl up under my blanket because this hurt. And I think that's a normal reaction. But over time I was like, okay, there's always going to be some percentage of the population who are like, how dare you email me about this thing? I just shrug my shoulders and say, I'm so sorry for bothering you, and move on. So that's one way to get over the fear. Another way to get past that barrier of, oh, this feels like it's a little too salesy language. It's easy for us sending the emails to feel that concern. And I think it's a valid concern to fear, but we also want to gut check that against, well, are people actually saying that in their responses to us? Are people saying that this feels a little too salesy when they respond to the email? Are we getting that feedback? Until we get that feedback, or until we see some indications of that, we're just, imagining a worst case scenario and allowing that fear to prevent us from moving forward. So I think starting off, seeing the type of response you get, and then iterating and modifying the language you use is the best approach to use there.
That's true. If there's one thing about the internet I've noticed is that if someone has some negative feedback that they want to give a stranger, the internet makes that feedback happen. Mm-hmm. All right. So Anthony asked one of my questions I was going to ask, so I'm just going to let you answer that for him. Let's transition to audience questions. Perfect. So here's what I'm going to do. We don't have that many queued up right now, so I'm just going to let me try to find Matt and invite him I'm promoting him to a panelist. We will see. That's up to him, I think, as to whether he wants to do that or not.
Welcome to the Thunderdome.
Hey, Matt. I'm going to read Matt's question here. I have an email list of 300 people. I know via their LinkedIn profiles they are in my target industry, but I want to identify the subset that spends money on professional development. That actually relates to a question I forgot to ask, which is, I think there are things that people need that are sort of secret. They don't talk about it publicly. And you talked about those triggers, Kai. So Matt is asking for some suggestions on what are the triggers for stuff that maybe doesn't show up on a website or isn't going to be there in nerdy data or whatever.
Right.
And, so why don't you speak to that, and then Matt's here for follow-up if he has any.
It's a good question, and you're right. We can think of it as like dark information. We don't know, and we can't easily detect this. A couple different strategies I'd recommend. So you have this email list of 300 people. You know they're in the target industry, and you want to identify that subset. Surveying them, sending out an email and saying like, hey, I'm doing some research on the types of professional development that insert target market here uses. If you've invested in professional development services over the last year, deeply appreciate it if you fill out the survey for me. Not 100% of the people will fill out the survey, but you could do some segmentation based on who clicked on that link to access the survey. Oh, they're probably invested in professional development if they click the link. And if they filled out the survey, you could say like, what types of professional development? What sites do you go to? What resources do you use? What benefits did you experience from that professional development? So segmenting based on a survey like that could be a very valuable way to say, okay, I have 300 people, 50 of them filled out the survey, or 25 of them filled out the survey, but 50 clicked on the link. That's going to be the segment I reach out to who more than likely have invested in professional development. It won't be everybody on the list, but it will be a segment thereof. Similarly, if we're doing prospecting through LinkedIn or through another data source, I'm coming around to the idea of an initial outreach campaign, either to a small segment of our entire list or to the entire list, focused on an ask of, hey, you know, I'm compiling an annual research report on insert target market here, and here's a short questionnaire. I'd love to get your input on it, and have the questionnaire be focused on like, have you invested in professional development in the last year? Yes, no. What was the major benefit of that professional development? Text area here. Thank you so much. And now we have a list of what's your email address? And now we have a list of the people on our outreach list who responded to the survey and who I think are higher quality leads. There's always going to be some amount of dark information there. We're not going to get 100% transparency on who in an organization or who in a prospect list has invested in professional development or any other dark trigger. But by surveying them, by asking the question, I can even imagine an initial outreach email. Hey, who in your organization is in charge of investing in professional development or scheduling professional development for employees? Is it you? If not, who do you recommend I get in touch with? Reaching out to them and starting that conversation that way could be a great way to discover if they're the person in charge of professional development investment, or if there's somebody else you should reach out to who will have that bird's eye view of what professional development looks like in that organization.
Okay.
Does that help? Am I explaining that well? Is there anything I could elaborate on?
No, that helps. That helps immensely. So I have one follow-up question, which is if I want to get some outside verification, so I know if they're BSing me or if I'm missing something. Like for example, let's say that I survey 300 people. 50 of them say that yes, I have spent money on professional development of some sort. The reality, though, let's say that there's 150 people. So if it's just a survey, then I think it's 50. But in reality, it's 150. Is there any way that I could get some outside verification of the information that I'm getting?
Most likely not. Most likely, I mean, I could imagine a couple roundabout ways. So let's say you're able to identify the companies that the remaining people on your list work with, doing outreach or initiating a conversation with somebody there and identifying who the training director is, or if the company invests in professional development might be an option, but it definitely is a challenge. I'd almost recommend an iterative process of, we sent out the survey, we had some portion respond back, we now have a better idea of the language they use to describe how they invest in professional development. So now we might go back to the list, segment out the people who responded to that questionnaire, and do broadcasts or individual outreach to them. Now that we know the more specific language and say, hey, I just had a quick question. I surveyed my list recently and they noted that the 3 biggest benefits of professional development were 1, 2, and 3. I'm curious, if you've invested in professional development in the last year, just hit reply and let me know what the 1 major benefit for you was. It will capture a little more of that list and get them responding and engaging in that conversation. There's no way, unfortunately, to get 100% data visibility there, so it really relies on people raising their hand and responding back. It might be that somebody's on your list who has invested in professional development, but they aren't giving that signal in any way, and unfortunately, as far as I know, that's going to remain a bit of dark information. There's no way to effectively tease that out.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much.
Glad to. Great questions.
Philip, I'll hand it back to you.
Is Josh there? I can't hear you, Philip.
Oh, there we go. Matt, I'm trying to find a way to kick you out. Let's see here. Change you back to a viewer. Thanks, Matt. So Josh asks, and Josh, if you'd like to ask follow-up questions, please do. Kai says he prefers to contact folks via email. If your database of choice is LinkedIn, would you still email them, or would you use LinkedIn's messaging system? And I think you spoke to that a little bit. But Josh, you're here. Welcome. Glad to see you, man. Follow-up questions or whatever you want to ask is fine.
Absolutely. Let me just jump into Josh's question and then we could dive into some follow-up. I would still email them. I'd use LinkedIn as sort of that database of record of like, okay, it lets me go from company to decision maker. And then I'd use a tool like Hunter or another tool to discover what their email address is, but then initiate that contact through email, primarily because we could follow up easier for using a tool like reply.io or QuickMail or BlueTick. And people are more likely to value a message that arrives in their work inbox than their LinkedIn inbox. If I check my LinkedIn inbox right now, it would be 15 people congratulating me on my 7-year anniversary of working at my company. Thank you so much. It would be 10 people advertising SEO services to me. It'll probably be 1 person from college who's like, hi, I haven't talked to you in 3 years. And that message is 7 months old because I forgot to respond to it. So I very much encourage reaching out through email over reaching out through LinkedIn because we process our inboxes. They're more valuable to us. If we follow up multiple times over multiple weeks, that message is going to continually be bumped to the top and somebody's going to say, wow, this person really is trying to get my attention. I better check in on this and see what they're asking about or why they're emailing. So very much encourage using LinkedIn as that database of record to identify decision makers, finding their email address using something like Hunter or Clearbit Prospector, and then moving across to email to initiate those conversations.
Yep, you already answered it.
Okay.
Josh, thank you. Cool.
Thank you.
And I'll also join you. I've done much less outreach than Kai and I've had pretty much 0% success rate using LinkedIn's built-in messaging system.
I found it works well. Let me give the one caveat where it's worked well. I have not done this, but I've been on the receiving side of this. If you're sending a very, very, very short question that promises a lot of value, like, hey, Kai, I saw you spoke at MicroConf on this topic. I put together this 1-page worksheet on this thing. I'd love to send it to you. What's your email address? And like, I literally just need to type in my email to respond and get the thing if it interests me. Those type of messages can perform better, but even so, 99% of the time, I'm going to say it's better to initiate the conversation through email.
Yeah, I've connected with, people like me, people I can collaborate with, but I've had zero luck getting clients through LinkedIn. So
yeah, I think identifying them on LinkedIn is great, but the outreach needs to take place off of LinkedIn.
Sweet, thanks.
It's not you, it's them, Josh. It's not you, it's LinkedIn.
Have a good one.
Okay, I'm going to switch you back to viewer. And Nadia's question is next. Nadia, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi.
Let's see. Do you want to read your question?
Yeah, I don't think I can see it anymore, but
I'll read it.
I remember it.
I'll read it verbatim. So much of what Kai is saying is taking an initial list that may be broad, chopping it down based on positioning statement. Would this process change at any point if your goal is to get on a podcast or write a guest post with the ultimate purpose of building your newsletter?
Eric and Philip know exactly why I have a huge grin on my face. I wrote a book, Podcast Outreach, about how to email people and get on podcasts as a guest.
Oh, cool.
So The process is very similar. It does change a little bit. LinkedIn, we wouldn't want to use as a database there. Typically, I'll use a podcasting directory. Dang it, I'm forgetting. Philip, do you remember the name of the directory? Oh, Cast.market. It's a advertising directory for podcasts to link up with advertisers, but it has a really robust full text search feature. So typically when I'm searching for a list of podcasts to reach out to, I'll use Cast.market, iTunes, seeing if somebody's written up like the ultimate list of podcasts for target market here, and just scrape that. And then I go through a similar process of like, cool, here are the companies or podcasts. Let's find their contact information and email. Now let's start that outreach sequence. And I'll typically use an initial email like, hey, saw your podcast name here. Super excited. Hey, I wanted to see if your audience would benefit from having somebody talk about benefit focus statement here. Here are 3 topics I could talk about. Topic 1, 1-sentence description. Topic 2, topic 3. If one of these sounds good to you, just hit reply and let me know, and we'll confirm the timeline and any additional information you need then. So the process is very similar. Identify the people, find their email addresses, start that outreach process. I think the major change is we're focusing on a database of iTunes or Cast.market or a list of podcasts, and then finding the email addresses from there. In terms of guest article outreach, Eric's used my podcast outreach system for guest article outreach, and he posted earlier, he reached out to 8 to 10 people and had an 80 to 90% placement rate on guest posts. Works incredibly well. What I found with both podcasts and content sites when I'm approaching them for guest posts is they're incredibly hungry for qualified professionals to show up who are even halfway presentable. If you show up and you're like, hi, I'm a professional. I help teach this audience a thing. Here are 3 things I could talk about. Would you like to have a conversation? You're ahead of 90% of the pack. I handle podcast bookings for 2 of my clients. People show up all the time. They're like, me. Would you like to have me on your podcast? I'm like, why? Why would I want that? So outreach is very effective. Finding those lists of podcasts or just content article sites is very effective. Follow-up is very effective. In terms of growing your newsletter, the one silver bullet I have found that works incredibly well, and Philip actually inspired me on this, is setting up a dedicated landing page, what I call a catcher's mitt. He has, I think it's positioningcrashcourse.com. I have freeoutreachcourse.com, getonpodcast.com, clientintakesheet.com. My call to action at the end of every podcast interview when the host is like, tell us how we could learn more about you. Some people are like, you could follow me on twitter.com/Kai Davis. I'm like, no. Go to freeoutreachcourse.com and sign up there to get a free 5-day lesson on, or a 5-part lesson on how to get people to respond to your emails. And that
so
converts.
You tie those landing pages back to the topic that you're speaking about, right?
Very much so. I think of it as categorical resonance, which is a crazy phrase I made up. Where I'm.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, it works very, very well, specifically because the people who show up on that landing page are the ones who say, oh, you talked to me for 30 minutes about this thing. You're advertising more information about the thing. I'm going to go sign up for that thing. I think I'm getting something around a 40% opt-in rate on client intake cheat sheet and free outreach course right now. There's definitely a lot of optimization I could do to bring that up. But still, 40% of those people jumping onto the list, I'm super happy with that.
Cool. Thank you.
Glad to help.
Any other questions, Nadia, along those lines?
I was just had a comment, which was with my clients, I do branding and design. And so what I've done before is create landing pages based on where the traffic is coming from to their site. But it's always been stuff like, hey, I want a dedicated page for like my Instagram followers or whatever. I never thought about doing it specifically for a topic that I'm speaking about, for whether it's a podcast or a guest post, wherever, it doesn't matter. It's actually tied to the content, not tied to the platform from where they're coming from.
Exactly.
So
and it becomes...
That's genius. Yeah, I love it.
It becomes super reusable too. So anytime I'm on a podcast talking about outreach, boom, I already have the landing page set up. I used to do it I'd say there's an alternate method where there's one landing page per podcast I'm on. And I did that for 1.5 years. Philip, I think, originally used that method too. And I ended up with like 50 pages in WordPress. And I'm like, this is terrible. I'm done with it. So I migrated to Philip's approach, and it's infinitely better.
Cool.
Yeah, theoretically, the page per podcast approach should be better, but it's just so high maintenance. I was never.
I think the only way that makes sense is if you have like some other type of conversion that involves an exchange of money, not a free course, and you need to be able to track specifically for that podcast, like, hey, they heard Philip and then they bought this thing. So I think that's the only time that actually may make sense, but otherwise, I like this idea way more.
One way I've saw that, at least in Drip, is you could have, I believe it's a Drip source tag. If you have the URL parameter DST, it will add a tag to the subscriber's account once they opt in with whatever that DST value is. So you could pass that in as a key, essentially, Phillips Podcast, and then see, oh, they're tagged Phillips Podcast. They converted. Average value of people that came through Phillips Podcast is $83.
Right. Cool.
Much more than that, I'm sure.
83,000.
There we go. All right.
Thank you.
You bet, Nadia. Okay, I'll kick you out in a minute, but let me go ahead and switch over to Annie's question. Hi, Annie. Welcome. I'll read the question, and then you're here for follow-up if you want. So how do you feel about looking at lists where people post help wanted type things? Maybe they're looking, and a variation of this I've seen is people are look at like job postings, and that's a trigger that tells them that that company maybe has some kind of need, or maybe they're posting for a freelancer or a contractor. So not the real bottom feedy place, this is like Fiverr, Upwork, but maybe there's other venues where you can see that. So does this make you come in, I'm kind of rephrasing Annie's question on the fly, sorry, Annie. Does this kind of make you come in looking needy? Does it change the power dynamic somehow?
Great question. I think it's a very valuable way to prospect. Robert Williams essentially built his service Let's Workshop, a lead generation platform for freelancers, off of automating this, doing it as a done-for-you service. So I think going and seeing like, oh, okay, I focus on this target market, and here's a place where people are posting help wanted ads or hiring contractors or hiring employees for this target market. It's a perfect opportunity to reach out to them and say, hey, you're hiring somebody, a contractor might make more sense, or I'm a contractor who could help with this. I think that's very, very applicable and could be a great way to identify that list of prospects to reach out to, either for market research processes. Hey, what made you decide you needed to hire somebody? What was that trigger? Or to position your services as a solution. Hey, you're looking for a contractor. Here's how I could help you.
So you would reference the fact that you saw that they did a job posting or whatever, or you would reference that in the outreach email?
Let me think on that for a second. I would. I think it gives validation to why you're reaching out to them. Otherwise, this person emailed me out of the blue about this thing. How did they know? I might say like, hey, I saw you posted on XYZ, looking for help solving this problem. Are you still looking for help solving that? If so, I specialize in just reply and let me know if you're still looking for help, and we could have a conversation about that.
What do you think, Annie? Any follow-up or any more details you want to pull out of Kai on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what I've been doing. And I find that the most successful version of it is to reply to things like listservs that are in my target market. So people are it's already like a click in a way. It's like already people who are doing the thing that I'm doing, or I'm doing for. And also to be really anal about answering all the points they ask about, because that makes you stand out from the junk they're getting. I mean, I've gotten a lot of replies that are like, even though we can't hire you, we're really impressed that you answered our questions like in, well communicated words. And so that's my tactic.
Oh, I think that's a wonderful tactic. Ramit had a post on I Will Teach You to Be Rich early on called, I love this title, The Craigslist Penis Effect, where the average quality of a response to like a personal ad on Craigslist is, oh my gosh, there's a penis in my inbox, help. It's the same thing I think with any type of help wanted ad that we see posted online. The average response is like, dear webmaster, I would love to help. Thank you. Please reply kindly. And when you actually put in the effort, as you demonstrate, people respond back and they're like, we can't hire you right now, but oh my gosh, you answered everything. Nobody else does. Just by putting in that tiny bit of extra effort, you stand out so much from the pack.
Yeah, and actually I think I got this idea from Philip, but looking for what organizations in my target market are hiring, and using that at like on the same mailing list, like seeing who's hiring like a new executive director or something, and then contacting them, because that could trigger changes that require my help, is another great tactic I'm hoping to go full steam on in the new year.
That's wonderful. No, I love that. It's a perfect way, since you're right, hiring somebody who's at the manager or director or CXO level, There's going to be change in that organization, like it or not. And reaching out to build that relationship early on can be a wonderful way to position yourself as the go-to resource as they encounter problems.
Cool, thanks.
Hey,
That's
thank you.
awesome.
Great ideas.
Yeah. Thank you, Annie. Okay, I will boot you out in a minute. I'll go ahead and start on Anthony's question. Anthony says, earlier on you mentioned meetup or events for, you called it non-ask events, which I'd never heard that before. So what have you found to be effective in hosting those events or finding ones to attend or that kind of thing?
Absolutely. It's an extension of what I see as like no pitch webinars where we're just getting people to show up and then engage with us and get on our list. I might say a real world equivalent or a real life equivalent of that is joining a meetup group, starting a meetup group. I'm going to start a meetup group for freelancers and consultants in Eugene in the coming year. And it becomes an opportunity for people to engage in a way where it's not like you're going to get pitched on a thing, but now I do have your information and you're on my email list and I'm able to reach out to you and say like, hey, you're a consultant. What's the number one problem you have as a consultant? So for real life outreach and for meetups and events, hosting them works well. You are the center of attention. You are the person people come to. You're the figurehead of that event. And that could be an incredibly powerful way to build relationships in the community. Attending existing ones could be a wonderful way to take advantage of somebody else's audience. And I'd recommend if there are similar meetups or real life events in your area, attend those first before starting your own, because suddenly you'll understand what's working well, what isn't working in them, who's attending them, if they match up with your target market, how to change the positioning of event you might host to better align with your target market. So attending ones first and then creating your own, I think, is the most effective pairing.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Let's say you're an introvert. You don't want to show up with like a clipboard and looking like you've got an agenda to somehow interfere with the sort of cozy, natural vibe of this meetup. How do you kind of take it out of band, or how do you use the meetup to further your purposes without being, a weirdo?
Great question. I focus on trying to be as human as possible. So whenever I'm at a meetup or a conference or an event, I'm always just asking questions. What do you do? How does your business make money? What's the cool thing in your tech right now that like nobody else cares about? I want to hear what's exciting to you. What's the number one problem you're facing? And as that conversation progresses, people love answering questions about their business or their role or the changes. I might say, that sounds fascinating. Hey, I want to mingle a bit, but I'd love to keep in touch with you and continue this conversation. What's your email address? And it becomes a nice and natural way to say, like, we had a cool conversation for 5 minutes. I'd love to continue this conversation, maybe over coffee. What's the best way to get in touch with you? And that becomes a nice and natural way to build that relationship, which you can then stack with market research or outreach or problem discovery or pitching your services eventually, but not come off as, hello, I would very much like to add you to my mailing list today. Please fill out this form. It's a nice way to have a normal conversation with the end goal of, I have their contact information. I can now start outreach to them.
Okay. Anthony, any follow-up questions? Maybe Anthony just had a new baby, so maybe Anthony is not available to talk.
Anthony.
Okay. Going on. Okay, we'll move on to the next question.
Sorry.
Oh, hey, Anthony, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No webcam today. My hair is up in rollers, so. Yeah, so I guess my question to follow up on that is, I've already successfully hosted a couple of, I'll just call them supper clubs for lack of a better term, where, like 6 people, eight people. And I'm just curious, I guess how you would scale that to a larger sort of meetup style thing or a larger event, because these seem to work pretty well, but at the same time, I guess I would take any insight on how to scale that without, I guess the dinner is the attractor right now. How do you scale that without paying for, 100 people's dinner?
Great question. I don't know the exact answer to that. Let me give some quick thoughts off the top of my head. When scaling an event like that, I think the community is the most important part. And it becomes almost a community management question first, rather than a scale question, because we want to make sure whatever great energy you have within those communities and that dinner party and that supper club, that's preserved and people don't feel like this used to be cool and now it's not. So asking the people in the group, like, what do you enjoy the most about these? Hey, I want to expand it and get more people involved. what would you as the group recommend? And letting the group offer suggestions and drive it. They might say like, hey, we love the intimate feel of the supper club, but you're right, it would be great if we had like 20 or 30 or 100 people. What if like we have the supper club and it's a little more exclusive and private, but we also host like a monthly or an every other week meetup at a local brewery or something similar, where the messaging or the framing isn't, hey, we're going to get together for supper and I'm paying for supper, but hey, we're going to get together as this community and talk about these topics and engage with each other. But I think it comes down to engaging with your primary community, these 6 people or the small group who's continually showing up and saying, hey, I'd love to grow this. Would it be valuable to you to grow it? What would you like to see happen to grow it? Alex Hillman has written a lot about community management and how to make the community really involved in growing a community program like that. So I'd recommend some of his resources on community as a next step there.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Glad to.
Thanks, Anthony. Okay, Meg, I'm going to promote you to a panelist while I read your question.
Hey, Meg.
Hey, Meg. Okay, so Meg asks, in some countries like Canada and the EU, they have actual laws about this stuff. Here in America, it's kind of a big wild, wild west.
We have no laws.
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing Meg's question, but basically the question is, other nations, other localities have laws about contacting people or spamming or that kind of thing. So what can you say about that might help people adapt this advice for those places where it's a little more regulated?
Absolutely. So Canada does have, and I think they're good laws, has laws preventing, as I understand it, it's people inside of Canada emailing people in Canada. If I'm in the US and doing a cold email campaign to people located in Canada, they can't enforce it because I'm not in Canada. The laws prevent cold email and these cold outreach campaigns or non-opted-in outreach campaigns from within Canada to people in Canada. So I know a few people who have worked around this by hiring a consulting firm based in the US or elsewhere, handing them a prospect list of Canadian companies and having them handle the outreach process. So even though I live in Canada, I have a job in Canada, I've hired somebody externally and they're doing the outreach. It's a weird workaround. I'm sure they're going to somehow close the loop on it and prevent it from happening, but that's what I've heard of people doing. In terms of precautions people should take so they don't end up breaking potentially similar laws, I've known a number of people who have broken like outreach laws and can spam laws, and unless you're doing it in no way am I encouraging people to break it, but what I've seen is unless you're doing it at scale, it typically goes unnoticed. You're going to get some people saying like, oh, report a spam, but if it's like a 50-person campaign, the chances are it's not going to go poorly. If it's a 5,000 or a 50,000 person campaign, it's probably going to trigger something. So monitoring the size of it, monitoring any spam reports you get, checking to see what the local legislation is, checking to see if there are workarounds like the Canadian workaround I mentioned, where if it's an external firm, like a firm based in the US doing the outreach, then it's outside of Canada and the law no longer applies, which again, weird, wacky workaround that I expect to be closed somehow, but that's what I currently see.
Meg, what details could Kai add there, or do you have any follow-up questions?
That mostly was it. I had to do quite a bit of research on the damn law when it came out, so I just was curious if there was anything similar in the States before I build my outreach list to the States. I thought it did apply to countries outside of Canada, but or to people emailing into Canada. So I'm happy to hear there might be a workaround to that. So yeah, I guess just was wondering if there was any similar laws in the States, or if you'd come across any, in your.
In the States, the one I'm aware of is the can spam legislation from the late 90s, early 2000s. And what it essentially prevents is you from sending, basically you can't add people who haven't opted into your email marketing platform. So you can't add them to MailChimp, Drip, Infusionsoft. The workaround with tools like Reply.io and QuickMail, the tools I use for outreach, is it authenticates against your mail server and then sends as if it was you sending through your email client. So it basically is strapping an engine onto your email program and having it send the emails automatically for you. And that avoids the can spam legislation.
Awesome. That was pretty much it.
Glad to help. Nice to see you.
It relates to a question from Ted, which was here in the chat. So is there, okay, it says with outreach, these people are not a part of your email list, they're not on your MailChimp list, your Drip email list. When should you, or should you at all, push the outreach people to become part of your email list? And should that somehow relate to whether they respond or not? In other words, is there a role? Should you try to follow up with them if they are unresponsive via email, or if they respond in the negative, I guess is how I would phrase that.
Okay, yeah. I think getting them to convert to your email list is a conversion that we could aim for and should aim for. Typically, I've approached it by offering something valuable, that lead magnet or that ethical bribe or whatever it may be, and having it behind an opt-in wall and passing in their email address as a URL parameter. So it's like, hey, get this thing, click the link. Hey, click this button. Oh, by the way, I'm going to send you a few follow-up emails about this thing. Unsubscribe at any time. And using that as a way to transition them to the list. I might also, in my follow-up, say, hey, by the way, I have this list. I send out a weekly letter every week about how to XYZ for target market, how to solve this problem for target market. If that's interesting to you, hey, click here and sign up, and you'll get the first lesson immediately. So I think there is value in transitioning these people we're doing cold outreach to our email list. We can't bulk add them. We will need them to opt in, but presenting that opt-in as an offer, as something of value to them, is an effective step to take, and something that I do in my outreach campaigns. Just having it as part of that follow-up sequence, or maybe email 6 is, hey, by the way, I have this 5-day course. You might be interested in it. It might be helpful. And they might click on it, sign up, and great, now they're going to opt into all my email communication. So I do think it is valuable to present them with that opportunity to opt in.
Awesome. Okay. Now we're going to do another sort of mini lightning round here. I've got a few questions that folks asked before that I want to just wrap up with, Kai, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
Okay. So Savo asked some questions that I think we have that you have almost completely responded to. So Savo, I'm trusting that you got what you needed from Kai. Because your question was kind of is there an end-to-end process that you can follow? And that's pretty much what Kai's presentation was. So I think we're good there. Here's a question from Ryan. As a software developer who has valuable insights that could help clients with their own development efforts, how might I find an audience? Or, do I choose more of a vertical? And I'd love to hear what Kai says on that. Of course, my standard advice is start with a market vertical because that's the easiest. And then all of your outreach can be framed in terms of their language, their sort of general needs that you know about. Kai, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think starting with a vertical makes the most sense. I just pulled up his question here. I think part of it is picking the vertical and focusing on the vertical. I think part of it is understanding the business outcomes behind development efforts. So it might be, so you mentioned find my own dentist vertical. Let's say you did pick dentists as your vertical. Dentists might hire developers to solve problems, but I highly doubt that there's an owner of a dental office who wakes up at 4 a.m. and is like, I need to hire a developer desperately. Maybe 1 in a million. So I think it's valuable to survey that market, do some market research, understand the business outcomes they're searching for when they hire a developer. And so you framed it as you have valuable insights that could help clients with their own development efforts. I think you'd want to reframe that to why valuable insights that could help my clients accomplish X with development as the tool or the methodology. So it's about understanding that business outcome that target market or that vertical is searching for, and then framing your skill or figuring out how your skill applies to help them solve it. Anything you'd add to that, Philip?
I think that's pretty good. Got some questions. I think that you're pretty well answered. Brent's questions about how do you find email addresses? How do you identify the right person to talk to? Eric had some great questions that we're not going to be able to get to in the interest of time. Sorry, Eric.
Follow up over email, I promise, Eric.
Okay, let's see here. Some ideas for better email copy ratios. Kai, I'm going to ask you to just do a quick 30-second, 1-minute unabashed pitch for your book, because I know you provide a lot of email copy ideas and specific templates in at least one of your. I mean, how many books do you have?
3 right now, with 2 more coming in the next 2 months.
Okay. So just let Jim know where he should look for info on that.
I am the author of Outreach Blueprint, a book that teaches you how to email anyone and get a response. You could find it at outreachblueprint.com. I also have a free outreach course at freeoutreachcourse.com. Outreach Blueprint is $29. I will be raising the price to $49 as part of my anti-Black Friday sale starting in the next 2 weeks. So if you would like to buy it now, you could go to outreachblueprint.com. It'll give you a framework. An updated version is coming down the pipeline. You get a free upgrade to it. It includes an extensive email template swipe file, wonderful for figuring out how to initiate those conversations. That URL is outreachblueprint.com. And again, if you want to take part in my anti-Black Friday sale, hold off for 2 weeks and you could pay $20 more because capitalism.
Fuad has a good question that I think might make a good place to wrap up, or it might open a totally different can of worms. We'll see. So the core of his question is, do you need to, I would rephrase it as this, to do outreach, whether it's for research or actually, let's start with the research use case. Do you need any supporting content on your website? Are people going to get that email from you and say, who is this person? Let me go Google them. Let me go do a little background research. Do you need to sort of have a web presence that supports or reinforces your outreach if it's for research? And then I'll ask about for sales.
I'd say it's valuable, but it is not necessary. It will... There's some percentage lift that will happen by having, even if it's just like a single page site where you're like, positioning statement, I help target market with thing. And that's it. Maybe it has an image as a background and that's it. So, and including that link in your photos, so people are like, oh, they help target market with thing. And it provides a little bit of social proof. I think we'd want to be afraid of creating dissonance where if we're going after an audience of dentists and if you Google and you find your website and it's like, I help carpenters with this thing, they'll be like, huh, I don't understand. So if you already have like an explicit position very well defined through some marketing material, be it your website or some easily findable source, consider adding a second one that you link to in your outreach emails. Drop $10 on a domain or $5 on a domain, throw up a static landing page that's like, again, positioning statement, company name, whatever, background image. So people click through and they're like, oh, they do thing for people like me. Perfect. So there is some value there. I don't think it's essential. I think it's an optimization you can make. If you ever get feedback from people where it's like, I Googled you and your positioning is different than this, what's going on here? That's a great signal that you do need that second marketing material in place to support the market research you're doing. Definitely not essential, but a good optimization to make along the way.
Great. Is that any different if you're doing sales or marketing instead of research?
If you're doing sales, I think it is a little more essential only because you want to have some sort of online sales material, what I think of as a sales page for a consulting service or a productized consulting sales page to direct people to that explains like, well, here's the pain, here's the dream, here's how I'm going to fix it for you, here's what's included. So when you start doing that sales pitch process or that sales outreach process, if you're planning, if you don't want to write a proposal every time, or if you want some marketing materials you could easily link to, having them available as a website that breaks down like, here's how I've helped people like you with testimonials and the problems I fix can be valuable. So I think it becomes more important as you move towards that point. I think we graduate, there's like an invisible transition line where it's like market research and it might not quite be a business yet because we're still evaluating it. We get to some point where like, oh, it is a business now at that point, and it's going to differ for everybody as we do market research and learn more about our target market. We're going to get to that validation point where we say, I want to sell services to these people. What should I do next? That's where you want that website in place.
Great. Kai, where can folks go to find out more? I feel like we've just gotten this tiny little bit of what you know about the subject. Where can they find out more?
Oh, they can always follow me on Twitter, or even better, you can go to freeoutreachcourse.com. Drop your email in the dingus. You'll get a 5-day email course from me on how to email anybody and get a response. I also run a Ask Me Anything page on my website. If you go to doubleyouraudience.com/AMA, you could drop your question in the comment box there. Usually within a day or 3, I'll respond back. Sometimes it's 100 words. Occasionally I write a 1,500-word mini blog post as a response there. My apologies in advance if I do, but the 2 best ways to get more information if you're interested, freeoutreachcourse.com will teach you how to email anyone and get a response, and doubleyouraudience.com/AMA is a perfect spot to ask me questions about your outreach campaigns or your marketing and get my feedback.
Kai, thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like everybody got something pretty awesome from this, including me. So thanks for sharing what you know about that. And here's what's going to happen next. I'm going to just literally hang up on all of you. And of course, there'll be a recording of this on my website. and we'll just see you all around online.
Hey, thank you so much. Great to see you all. And thank you again, Philip. And thank you, everybody who tuned in. And again, my apologies for the people who had disastrous family accidents and weren't able to attend. I'm so sorry.
Always an excuse. See you around, Kai.